Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. Today, we are joined by Ryan Sanders. Ryan is the co-founder and managing director of an organisation called EII Consulting, where EII stands for Educate, Innovate, and Inspire. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware with a focus on international business. And today we're going to talk a lot about learning leadership, and about how to put those learnings into practice. So Ryan, absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
Thanks, Mick. It's good to see you in person and to be involved in this project. Your program leadership project sounds like an excellent concept. I'm really excited to be involved in some small way. So my background has taken a wide-ranging tour of ideas and concepts. I initially went to graduate school for international relations. I was more focused on political science and that, and I thought I wanted to be a diplomat. But I didn't really at the time understand what I was best set up to do, which is more along the lines of leadership development. Diplomats tend to have to negotiate, they have to compromise, and what I was trying to do and help people at the time was help them become better versions of themselves. I learned that when I met my business partner, Ron Pearson, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But Ron had created this company to do conflict resolution and leadership development. So that's kind of the path that I took to get in. I later in life, I guess maybe I was a late bloomer, learned what leadership really required and wanted to really get involved in it more. And I've found, I'm sure you've looked over the years, just of history and how important good leadership is. It causes most of the problems that we face in our world today. So if we have good leaders, we actually have much fewer problems.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ryan. And many people have heard me say this on the show, and it's a big reason why we created the Leadership Project movement. Only 16% of the people in the world are in jobs that they love and truly like their boss. And we're spending up to 1/3 of our lives in places that we're not happy. And leadership is at the heart of most of that. So tell us a little bit more about Ron then. Sounds like a very inspirational man himself. What can you tell us more about him?
He was. Ron was a retired Lutheran minister. And he retired in 1990. And for his second career, he started this consulting firm. So he called it, Ron Pearson, R.E. Pearson Associates. And so that what he was a master at was conflict resolution. I've watched him resolve conflicts that I thought were unresolvable. And he would sit in the room, ask questions to identify what the issues were. Usually using some form of profiling as well to get their preferences out, so he could speak more effectively to them. And then almost in a minute, I can actually see him doing it. He would lean back in his chair, cross his arms, and say to them, usually with his finger over his lips, and say, "I think I'm hearing," and tell them exactly how they felt. And they would nod their head, say, yes, that's it. And all of a sudden he said, well, how about we resolve it this way? He was actually an excellent leader as well. But I don't think he even understood how good of a leader he was.
Interesting one there for everyone listening at home. Listen to the power of that language. I think I'm hearing. What you're not hearing there is any judgment. So in conflict resolution, one of the really powerful ways to diffuse a situation is just to play back what you are taking away or what you are hearing without judgment. And I don't know Ron, and I'm already liking him in terms of the role play that you've just shown of the way that he went about it. That's a very powerful use of language. And I will say it, conversational intelligence in the way that he's engaging with those two people. Conflict resolution is one of those ones where young leaders particular, so someone that is an individual contributor that graduates into their very first leadership role, and after a period of time, they discover that human beings are far more complex than they ever thought. This can be one of those times of anxiety when they go into that first period of conflict resolution. Could be between two staff members. It could be across different cross-functional teams. What advice could you give around there, Ryan, for the very first time leader who's in their first period where they've got conflict in their teams?
Right. Well, I think that probably the first thing to think about and remember is that a lot of the tools we offer and coach are really easy to understand. They're simple things. It's just that they're difficult to apply. In our world, so for a first-time leader, I would suggest you remember how we've been taught. Most of us went to high school and undergraduate school, college, and all that, and we remember being told what to do to get an A. How do I get that perfect score? And you just tell me what to do, and I will do it. As a leader, you have to do the exact opposite. You can't tell your people what to do because you're not there doing their job. If you are, you're micromanaging. So the reality is you need to be asking questions. What obstacles do you need removed so you can do your job much better? And that means shutting your mouth and asking them what's going on. And most of us have not been taught that way. When you're in school, you sit down, shut up, and follow the rules. And we don't encourage in our educational system people to question, to doubt, to challenge their leaders, even in classroom. So it's one of the hardest things to do. It's what I try. One of the reasons I teach is that I try to create that dynamic where the students should and are encouraged to challenge my approach in some way.
Oh, I like that a lot. That's a great environment that you're talking about there, Ryan. And what I'm hearing there is about, there is no A in business. It isn't an exam. And it's not even about you when you're a leader. It's about your ability to inspire others into action and to draw out of them what is out inside of them. And I love what you said about getting obstacles out of their way and trying to help them navigate. It's not about telling them what to do. It's not telling them right or wrong answers. It's about inspiring them and drawing out of them what is already deep inside of them. And we need to always remember that we employ people because they are talented, because they have certain skill sets. If you want to employ someone that you're just going to tell, okay, today you're going to do 1, 2, 3, and you're going to do it in this order and exactly like this, you could employ anyone to do that. But what you really want is to employ people that learn to think for themselves and learn to learn, which is then a good segue maybe to talk about your business, Ryan. And one of the things that I picked up when I was reading about your organization and the way that you go about your business is this banner of leading by learning. Tell us what that means to you.
Right. Yeah, actually we have our leadership platform is Teach to Lead Together. We encourage our team to teach the individuals, our clients, to become better leaders, but to become better leaders together as a group. If we're not doing it together as a team, we're missing a big piece of the issue. So and in fact, as we talk to our leaders too, we remind them again that their title might be president or CEO or supervisor, or whatever whatever their title is, but they really aren't a boss. They are actually a teacher because they have an idea in their mind, and we have to somehow communicate that idea to the people around you. I'll give you a quick example. A client of mine one time, he was president of a hospital, about 6,000 employees, very large, 100, I think it was like 1 million square feet, it was a huge building. And we sat down with him. He actually called me up. He wanted to do the Myers-Briggs. And I said, so it might be great, but what are you going to do with it? And he's like, oh, I didn't think of it like that. So I was like, it's great to do it, but you have to use it for some purpose. So we met with him, and he said, as we talked, I have this problem. I have a relatively new team that I've just put together and I want to have it more nurse oriented, the whole hospital system. And I'm hoping that by having it more nurse oriented, we get better patient care as a result. It's a great idea, and it's something that is around the world people are trying to do more of. The nurses touch the patients most. So what he said, though, then was, my problem is all my ideas stop right there at my door. He said they don't filter down to the rest of the hospital. And I said, that's when as soon as he said that, I was like, you're not teaching. I didn't say that to him, but in my head it went off. I was like, okay, I see what the problem is. So we had to teach him how to teach his team, so that that team it was about 8 of them that was his immediate support. They were all the vice presidents of the hospital. They then had to teach it to their teams and on down the line. So that's honestly, leading. If you're struggling with how to teach people, you're probably struggling at how to lead as well.
There's a lot to unpack there, Ryan, and I want to tell you what I'm hearing here. What's coming through loud for me is what I would call boardroom management or boardroom leadership, where chairman, president, surrounded by vice presidents, perhaps an advisory board, all sitting in a room somewhere, setting direction, thinking everything is amazing and going, oh, we're the greatest company in the world and we are people focused and all of these things in this room, completely oblivious to what's actually happening outside of the room and whether there's actually anything going into action. Is that what I'm hearing there, or have I missed the mark?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's spot on. I could actually give you an example of that happening. The example I gave you. One of the vice presidents was not a good fit, and I for confidentiality reasons, I can't tell you who it was and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But the VP was probably. I started working with her the first month she had been hired. The problem was, she was overseeing the nurses part of the facility. So basically, she was in charge of all the nurses, and did not apply most of these skills very effectively, to the extent that one of my associates was at the pool with her kids. They talked about them and how that they weren't doing their job effectively, and they were complaining about the leadership. And that leadership challenge is one of the issues, is that if the staff are frustrated, you're missing the point. And if I overhear it at the pool, where else are they saying? That's kind of the challenge you got to be very careful with, is that you do not want your staff to be bad-mouthing your organization outside to others and have others overhear it. And that happens really quickly if your team isn't cohesively teaching the things they need to do.
Let's touch on that one just a little bit, only briefly. But one thing to remember is that every single person in your organization is a brand ambassador for your company. And in this example, bad-mouthing the organization in a public environment around the pool, you got to remember that there could be customers within earshot. There could be prospective employees, future employees within earshot, that are now going to have that seed in their mind. Oh, yeah, I don't think I'll apply for a job at that organisation. I'm not so sure about the leadership there. All right, so just a side note there. So how did you flip that one around? Let's go a little bit deeper into the case study. Tell us how you flipped that around and what happened next.
Well, in that situation, we took that to the president and said, "Hey, this is what happened," and laid out the situation and said, it's not our place, of course, now to say anything about what happened. You have to now address this in some form. What do you think would be the best option? So this is where we've put into place some of the tools that we use for our clients. The self-awareness piece is a really important tool. What are their preferences? How do they like to be spoken to, and vice versa? We knew these two. We use the Myers-Briggs often for our work, but any tool you want to use is fine that does self-awareness personality assessment. In this case, the two of them are similar preferences. So we said, look, you have to speak to her in the terms that are clear, that are direct, and do not attack her sense of competence. If you do that, she'll get defensive, and we don't want defensiveness. We want to create solutions for this. So that's what he did. Addressed it with her in a relatively direct way, and said, "Hey, we heard this information, and what are we going to do to address it?" And she actually kind of fumbled with it and got defensive, in fact. And we kept seeing similar activities that were coming across the board with her peers as well. And ultimately, within a few months, the president decided that there was a better place for her, and it helped her get another job in another hospital system. Which actually, this might give you an instance. Like, sometimes a good leader needs to know when to coach his people out as well as coaching them up. And that was one instance where there was a better fit for her. She didn't want to follow the model that he was creating, and that's fine. Then go somewhere else. I'm sure your skills will be useful elsewhere.
Yeah, interesting. And I've got a view, this is something that I've formed over a time, that there is a time and a place in every team's life and every team's journey that they need different leaders for different stages of their life. So sometimes the team is ready for a new leader and the leader is ready for a new team. Doesn't always have to be so black and white as to whether it's right or wrong. And it could be that this person went to another team and flourished in a different environment at a different stage of team development, or even in a different dynamic. There's something.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a great point to think about. Something in our society, globally, we always tend to think of records as lasting longest or getting the most or the best. And that's not always the case. It's sometimes being the CEO for 25 years is a great thing. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes you want to move on to a different place and different pastures. It depends on where you are. Heck, even in personal relationships, is one of the reasons why we often date someone before we marry them. Because you might realize that, hey, our paths are going a different direction and we shouldn't get married. I want to go here, you want to go there. All of those are reasonable things. And it starts with understanding your expectations and articulating them to yourself and to others.
I want to explore this a little bit further. This is going to be interesting, Ryan, because I'd like your views on this. I'll share a personal story, and then it's leading to the topic of succession planning. So I've had this happen multiple times in my career. In fact, this is fresh in my mind because I wrote a chapter in my upcoming book on this very topic just 2 days ago. So I very recently launched a brand new business within Cubic Transportation Systems called UMO. And I think that I'm very good at that. I'm good at launching new teams, forming them together, giving them vision, launching brands, getting a business up to a running entity. And in this case, it happened faster than I expected it, and also faster than my boss expected. So in a period of 14 months, we went from a business that didn't exist at all to a business that had 6 platforms and multiple teams working together remotely and into a running state within 14 months. So that's my strength. What I'm not as good at is operation. And the person that I'd been preparing for succession, Bonnie Crawford, exceptional at operation. So we've already transitioned that team. So, and you could say that 14 months ago, I took my dream job. Okay, here's this wonderful business to start and all this kind of stuff. But there's a moment in time where you stop and go, actually, the best thing for this team right now is a new leader, someone that's got a different skill set to me. And by the way, that released me to go and do something else in Cubic, which I can't talk too much about. It's a little bit confidential, but that gave me the ability to go and lead my next team, right? So now the key in that, this is where I want to ask you a question. So the first lesson is right leader at the right time for the right stage of that business or that team. But the other thing is, whether she knew it or not, I'd been preparing Bonnie for that succession from day one of the business. And I think this is something that many younger leaders, which I guess I'm not young anymore, but many younger leaders struggle with, is the idea that you should be starting to think about succession even from early on. Any thoughts on that?
I would say that even older leaders have that same issue, maybe more so. Yeah. So that gets us. That it's funny. Our thought processes are spot on the same route. I push my clients same thing to think about succession planning immediately. It's what are you going to do if you get hit by a bus? You might not be out of it. In fact, the one client I was just referencing earlier, the president ended up getting ulcers and was out for 2 weeks. And the ulcers were a consequence partly of all the work he was trying to get done. And that's a challenge. So how can you make sure your organization is going to run if you aren't there? We branded our company's process, the leadership insurance, for a reason, because it's ensuring that at some point in the future, if you can't be there, don't want to be there, or need to move to something else, then your team can keep the ball rolling while you're not there, not available. It's a legacy protector, and that's what we ask our team to think about: is what are you, as you think about your leadership style, what do you want your legacy to be? And that requires succession planning thinking, of course, because someone has to be able to do what you do. And that's, I think, maybe the hardest thing for any young leader as well as an older leader to think through, in terms of, because there's a fear there. You have to be very confident in yourself and that your team, that they're not going to overthrow you and kick you out. So trust and vulnerability are a key piece of leadership. And it gets again back to the tools we have to teach our team are honestly usually never the skills of a professional career. It's what obstacle can I remove for people so that they feel safe at work in any version of that name or that term.
Yeah, good, Ryan. And you brought up the word fear, and I think that's the root of it for most people. We shouldn't generalize too much, but for most people, it's feeling threatened that there might be someone in their team that is uber talented and may rise up and take their job or exceed their own career, et cetera, et cetera. And the only thing I can say to everyone, leaders young and old, is that the sooner you get past that, the better. So the realization that people actually admire leaders that develop other leaders, and certainly not the other way around. There's no admiration for a leader that's held someone back from their own personal development. And even if you want to take a selfish approach to it, if you've developed a great successor, or two, by the way, because sometimes your succession plan doesn't go well and you might have to have more than one option. But if you've developed a great succession line and some options, the team doesn't become dependent and reliant on you. So you can take leave if you need to and actually switch off for a few weeks because you've got someone ready-made to step in. And when the opportunity arises for your next promotion, there won't be any doubt in the executive's mind going, oh, there's no way that we can promote Ryan. He's absolutely fundamental to that team. If we take Ryan out of that environment, that team is going to collapse. So even if you take a selfish approach, it's in your own interest. But take a broader approach. It's in the team's interest. It's in the organization's interest for you to start succession planning from day one of your new job.
Yeah. And if I can add a corollary onto that, there's a really fascinating aside that is important to consider. And this is where my political science comes into play. We all know Machiavelli and the Prince and what his political philosophy about that. But I suspect that not everybody has read his larger book and probably I would suggest better book, which is called The Republic. As you suspect, it's about republics. What Machiavelli's thinking was that a prince can rule by fear. And as I'm sure you've seen throughout the history of this world, that happens quite often. So dictatorial thought, authoritarian thinking does work. It works for a time. Productivity tends to be less and results tend to be less effective. But that's where I think we have this problem with our leadership, why it's so easy to understand, but so difficult to do, because leading by fear, by just pushing people around, is easier. And it doesn't take knowing all of the Myers-Briggs types of your team. It doesn't take a thought process that asks questions and lets people kind of come up with ideas on their own. It takes less time. I mean, think about teaching. A lecture is the easiest way to tell people all information in your head. But science is pretty clear that's the least effective way to learn. So in fact, I even have a book. I haven't read it yet, but I have it here called How Humans Learn. One of my colleagues was talking about this book, and so I haven't read through it. But what I know it's discussing are the tools that people use, and we in our why we teach to lead together. We talk about andragogy, adult learning theory, how adults learn, and the one thing that we've learned is that adults learn selfishly. That means they only learn what they care about. So if you're trying to tell somebody by a lecture, you need to make sure that this floor is swept. If they don't care, they're not going to do it. So, or if they do it because you forced them to, they're not going to do it well or consistently. And it's understanding, taking that time to get it done and get it done well is where it really comes down to the difference between good enough, which fear-driven leadership can do, and excellent, which is what you see with companies like Google and Amazon that lead beyond and make success beyond what most leadership can achieve.
I think that's at the very heart of leadership, Ryan. So the first one is the role of the leader to inspire people into action because they want to do something, not because you told them to do it. And then could not agree with you more about the learning. Time and time again, it's proven that, and you are an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware, and I'm sure you take a different approach, but the old days of a professor standing up and giving a lecture where less than 10% of what's said may be recalled and people will be picking the bits that they need to remember to pass an exam, versus learning of self-discovery. So anything that you discover yourself, even if you weren't the first person to discover it, if you discover it yourself, you will remember it for your entire life. If someone stands up and lectures you, you'll selectively remember parts of it, and maybe for a period of time whilst it's useful to you. And once it's not useful to you, you will also soon forget that. So that's something for all of us to think about. I'll very quickly close the loop on the story on Bonnie, because I don't want to leave that thread untied, and then we'll come back to this leading by learning. So what then happens now is Bonnie Crawford is already taking that business to new levels compared to where I could take it. So I took it so far, and now with her unique skill sets, she's going to take it even further. And what I want to share with you and the audience is that all I do now is watch that with admiration and pride, not with any kind of envy or jealousy. It's like, wow, look at what she's doing with it. And I take pride that I launched that business, I set the vision and the direction, and that I brought up this wonderful leader who's now going to take it to amazing heights and put that vision into reality.
Yeah, that's a great point. If I could add on to what you just said there, again, back to how humans learn. Humans learn based on incentives. That things that, and we know this again from history. This is why free market economics typically works pretty well, because the incentive is there to perform. And the same thing there, but in your case, the incentive isn't money. And I think for most of us, we found that a salary or bonuses are sunk costs. People don't perform better because they get more money. That's an assumption that they know they're going to get paid, and that's part of the expectation. The real incentive is the pride, the rewards, the abstract things that you can't measure all that effectively, although they are measurable. That's the stuff that really drives people to perform at their greatest. And I think you just gave a great example. The reason you were happy to step down was the pride, the reward you got when somebody was able to take over and run it well.
1000%, Ryan. You've absolutely nailed it. And salary pays the bills and it fuels the economy and all of those things. But what really drives people to do great things is belief in the vision and the mission.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to leading by learning. What I want to test with you here, and you and I had a quick chat about this yesterday, the evolution of leadership training. And in some respects, some of the case studies that we've been talking about reflect on this as well. How do people actually put it into practice? We've had a history where some of the leadership programs that people go on to are transformative in some respects, that the person comes away from, they go on a week's leadership course or whatever the case may be, and they come back personally transformed, or they've got some new knowledge, or they've got some new skills. But sometimes it's not actually put into practice. How do we transform leadership learning and all of these skills to ensure that they're actually put into practice?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Literally in a lot of ways. That's, if you notice, most of the books on management and leadership, they tend to often tell you the whys, the what's, those kinds of questions. They struggle though in how to tell you it applies to your specific instance. And there's a really important reason why that is. I'm sure you've heard the books like Patrick Lencioni writes, or Stephen Covey, or there's so many good ones. Fred Kaufman is another excellent one. They all have great themes and great ideas, but it has to be tailored to your specific issue. That's the challenge. What you're doing is different because the people you're working with, the organization's goals you have, and the time that you're living in are all different. So it depends on what you're going to be doing, on how you actually apply your skill set. So that's what we teach our team to do. Is that the how is honestly a really simple thing. Again, measuring it. So you measure your leadership. And often what that is, it's not that complicated. It's not like you have to measure the number of widgets you have put out. It's measuring acceptance. So I'll give you an example from my classes. It's the easiest way. So with my students, I do only essay assignment. The reason I do essay writing is because, again, the best way to learn is to write it down and think about it and get what's in your head out in a constructive way. That works with critical thinking. But it also allows me to get a window into see how students are doing. So I do it on large assignments, large essays, as well as small. So throughout my semester, we have, I call them survey questions. So I'm talking about something, we're having a discussion, or we're going through the modules of the program, and there's a stop point there where we stop. So, okay, answer this question. Talk amongst yourselves if you want to, or just work on your own. Either way is fine. But that's for extroverts and introverts. It doesn't matter how they come up with their idea. What I want to see, I don't really care if the answer is right. It doesn't matter to me. I don't even grade. I don't even look at all of them. I just want to see that it's been done. So did they do it or did they not? What that tells you is their engagement. And that's all you want. You want to know if they're engaged. If they're not engaged for whatever reason, then you zero in on that and say, why are you not engaged? Why are you not doing this assignment? What's missing? You start asking questions. Remember what we said earlier today? Always ask a question. What's the obstacle that's preventing you from getting this assignment done? And usually they'll tell you, I'm too much work, too much this, too much that. And you can then, all right, how do we create a solution for that? And develop it from there. So really, that's how simple this is. So if you, I think back to the case I gave earlier, the president of a hospital system, if what you say isn't being done, ask them why. say, hey, what's going on here? This hasn't gotten done. Is there something, did I not say that clearly enough? Or do you need some help in figuring out how to apply it to your team? Those are the kinds of questions you have to do. Now you see how that can get complicated. This is why I said earlier that you can really only manage 8 to 12 people on your own. And you have to train it to others to do that, because you have to know 8 to 12 people's problems and who they are and how they're struggling. I used to teach a class of 35 to 40, and sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 classes a semester. So it's hard for me to do it with students, but it does work even with that number. And mostly, in fact, I've gotten to the point where I rarely have students fail. And rarely even have them get C's because I have trained them to tell me when they need something. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Okay. So really taking the time to understand the person's individual circumstances, taking the time
it's essential
to get to know them personally, understand what drives them. And I like what you said about, okay, so what is it that's preventing you here? What can we do about that? Very good. Okay. So
now, the one challenge for that, sorry to interrupt there. The one challenge there is that often they might come back with something that you can't solve or you don't know how to resolve it. And this is where some of the other pieces of accountability and mental resilience come into play. You can teach them how to create stronger mental resilience, so they don't. Because I've met students who are having an emotional moment. Their grandfather died. Their parents, they maybe have 2 jobs and they're going to school. I've had students that are struggling because there's just too much on their plate. And in fact, I had one student. This is a great example. She said to me in my syllabus and in verbally, I say, if you have a problem, ask me before it becomes an issue, so we can resolve it. So she said that to me. She's like, you said that you wanted to hear if there's an issue. And she said, I'm having trouble right now. I have a full-time job, just bought a house. My mother's moving in with me. And I just can't get all this work done right now. And I said, all right, when can you get it done? And she's like, I can do it. This week is rough, but I can do in 2 weeks. I can have everything accomplished. I was like, fine. Well, you get an extension until then. It was in, and it was a great paper. I mean, deadlines are fine, but in the business world, how often do you break through a deadline? And so that's what you want to teach people is if you have a problem, ask me and we can fix it. And all I care about is, did you learn or not? I don't care if you got it in by 12:22 in the afternoon. And so most leaders have to think about this. There's a limit, of course. This student only asked for that one time. And if you ask every assignment, well, then, okay, what's going on here? There's a problem. Again, measuring and keeping track.
Might be a different root cause there if it's a recurring pattern, right? So
exactly, right. So, and that's what the challenge, of course, these are abstract things. You see, I'm saying you got to measure their engagement. You have to measure their communication with you. You have to measure their mental resilience. How often do they stick to something? Those things can be more difficult to measure. And I'll be honest, most leaders I've seen don't measure those things because they vary depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, really.
So that's really, go ahead.
No, you go, Ryan. Sorry.
That's really how you hit the how aspect of this. And if you start from that perspective of, I need to measure abstract behaviors so that I can see whether they're doing well or problematically. Because you want to do the opposite. If they're doing well, get out of their way and let them keep going. But so you want to measure how well they're doing and keep track of that, because at some point, one thing that happens with the A+ students is because they do so well, they're sometimes ignored and they aren't given incentives to continue to do those things. Because you're like, oh, you're good. I'm going to focus on the problem kids. And no, don't focus on your problem children. Focus on everyone equally. So measuring everybody and making sure you're giving incentives to those who are doing well as those who are struggling or even in the middle. It's that level that you have to work with.
So can you give some advice to our audience at home that might be leading a small team in a business environment, what kind of measures would you recommend that they consider?
Sure. The easiest way to think about that would be to think of a specific industry you're in. So how about think of an engineering? I worked for an engineering company one time. So they did maintenance. So that was engineering department. They did maintenance for all the facilities involved. And this was a blue collar workforce. They weren't all that particularly well educated. Mostly had high school education at best. Some had some specialty training for their AC conditioning and things like that. And so, what do you do to empower a team like that? And what we ended up doing with this group, because their performance was good, but they weren't great, if that makes sense. There were sometimes things missed. For instance, sometimes staff would pencil whip, as we used to call it, the replacements of filters and things along those lines, because it was a lot of work. Light bulbs, I mean, the facility we were operating had hundreds, probably thousands of light bulbs so one would go out every day and have to go change it. Managing that kind of detail was difficult, and it's also a mind-numbing job, but we don't have a machine that can go around replacing light bulbs yet. So measuring that and rewarding your staff came down to a matter of a computer program. They started looking at how the staff had to fill in their information, a little bit like the survey questions that I was suggesting. You fill in what you get done, then the managers would have to look at the information to see if it worked and spot check things to grade them to make sure things were working well. And if it wasn't, then they had to ask them why. And if it was, they had a system of rewards we started to give out. And what was great about this system is that you could give rewards to each other. So if a peer needed some help, and one of his colleagues helped him change light bulbs that day because he got overwhelmed, you could give that person a reward. And those rewards added up to the best part, paid time off. That was mostly all that the reward was. You could get other things like the pizzas and gift cards and things like that. But 9 times out of 10, what they wanted was time off, time for themselves. And so that was a thing that they got approved to do, to give people that time. So what you could then do is look at the whole pattern. Who's getting time off? When are they taking it? Who's getting the most rewards? And that all of a sudden now you have your high performers are being not only rewarded and incentivized, you now see exactly who they are and what they're good at. Because you're seeing, for instance, like, oh, this guy helped me with a construction project. This guy helped me with electric. And you can see where each person's skill sets and interests are. If they're doing something for somebody, it's probably something they want to do. So maybe you say to them, hey, if you like doing this electrical work, do you want to become an electrician? Yeah, I do. Great. How can I help you? Should we send you to school for it? Those are the kinds of, all of a sudden now you're building a reward system, and that empowers your team as well as trains and coaches and encourages them. Does that make sense? Like it has to be a whole focal point where the rewards end up being your metric.
Yeah, so I like this concept on the rewards and making sure that the reward is meaningful to the recipient, not meaningful to you, meaningful to the recipient. It's got to resonate with them and being important to them.
Yeah. It might scare people to say paid time off because, well, what if everybody takes off on Friday? Who cares? I mean, why does it matter? I've seen more and more research that working harder isn't better. It's working smarter. So if they can get their job done in 38 hours instead of 40, or 36 hours instead of 40, great. Let them do it.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I'm hearing, Ryan, which I think is interesting, and I might have to put a diagram in the show notes, although most people have probably seen this. I'm also hearing in what you're talking about there, the famous Venn diagram of someone finding their own sweet spot. And their own sweet spot is a Venn diagram that covers what they really enjoy doing, what they're good at, and what the need is. And if you can find a role for that person in the organization that coincides with those three things, they are going to be so motivated to come to work each day and knock it out of the park if you can find those things. So, but it takes the time to get to know them and understand what does motivate them and what they are good at and where that can actually fit into the broader team dynamics.
When I think about the skill sets of people who have been rewarded like that, that's where you see leadership really coming out. And because individuals, they don't have to necessarily be a leader to have learned that their skills can help the organization and themselves. And you often find that a great leader is actually not in a management position. And I'll give you an example of that with one of my friends. He's a computer science engineer. And so he programs computers he mostly focuses on search. So he helps people, find information. And for years, people have been trying to make him vice president of something and to manage everything. And he's like, I don't want to do that. I like operating and programming. I don't want to manage people. I want to manage code. And what's awesome about him is that now, as he's been in his career, that's about 30 years, 20 years, 25 years he's been doing this, he has started to teach everybody around him how he does things. He does a lot of test-driven development, so he tests it before it's actually complete. So he doesn't have any errors in his code when it comes out because he tries it as he goes. And he's teaching people all around him, and he's got little acolytes that follow. And that's what you want with your teams. You encourage them to use the skill sets and how they overlap with the expectations that we need of the company.
We covered this relatively deeply in our episode with Ross Nichols. So if anyone hasn't heard that one, go back and listen to this. But people leadership is not for everyone. What we've just heard in Ryan's example is still leadership. It's just a different type of leadership. And this person's been really open that they don't enjoy people leadership, but they are still a leader in other ways. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you need to look out for those examples to make sure that you don't take someone who is the best programmer in that organization, probably without any doubt, and take them away from what they love and put them into a people leadership role that they actually do not want and do not like. So giving them that ability to do some leadership, some technical leadership, some coaching, some training, etc., but without giving them the people leadership aspect that they're really not going to enjoy. There's something in that. Now I'm going to bring some of this all together here, and let's run with this for a moment, Ryan, and see where this goes. So what we're talking about here in all the different kinds of conversations we've had today, we're covering what is both the complexity and simplicity of what leadership can be.
Right.
All wrapped in
ironic.
one. It's ironic, right? Now have a think about this. And for those that are watching this interview on the Zoom call, I'll paint a picture for everyone on the audio. Behind Ryan is a bookshelf full of leadership books. Behind my head, a bookshelf full of leadership books, which are all wonderful things to read and understand and comprehend. But it doesn't mean anything until we put it into practice and into relevance. So reading a leadership book does not make you a leader. Applying leadership principles into your own unique dynamics of your team is what makes a leader. And being able to bring it back, the complexity of human beings, like we spoke about that earlier in the interview. Human beings are complex and they do have different needs and they're all individuals. But to make it simpler, you need to be able to ask the right questions, you need to be able to pay attention, listen intently, and then you'll actually find the right path. So it is a complex environment. But if you break it down to the simplicity of listening, learning and drawing out from people what they want to do and what fires them up, etc., you can actually make it more simple than what it seems on the surface. Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're so right about that. The practice of applied leadership is one that is a relatively new world. In years past, we used to study, the good leaders, and never actually thought about what it was that made people follow them. In fact, I use some examples when I'm working with clients on building their leadership platform. I use political leaders from the past. So I'll talk about FDR or Abraham Lincoln, or when you think about Winston Churchill. Each of them had flaws, but they also had skills that were applicable in some way. Even go back to someone like Martin Luther King or Gandhi. All of them, people followed them for a reason. And it wasn't just because that they were smart people. I mean, everybody was probably listening to this podcast is smart. The problem is, how do you apply that smarts in a way that gets others to come along with you? That's the hardest part for any leader. Is you may have a belief and a vision of where things should be, but you have to bring people along at the pace they're going to be brought along. You can't rush that. You can't force it. Even with teaching, it's the same thing. We actually, Carl, who works for our team, told me this one time. I love the phrase he used. He said, you have to meet people where they are. And when you meet them where they are, you can help bring them to where you want them to be and where they maybe should be.
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit with David Morley in a recent episode as well. Exactly that is meet them where they are and start bringing them progressively towards where they need to be. But at the same time, make sure that you're exhibiting the behaviors that you expect. So you need to be the role model of the behaviors that you're trying to drive everyone towards. It's an interesting challenge, but once again, keep it simple and you can do it. So to bring that to a head, there are tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of leadership books in the world. Let's say tens of thousands. There's tens of thousands of leadership books in the world. I can tell any leader listening, you will never find a leadership book where unless you wrote it yourself, where you open up page 1 and it perfectly describes you and your team, right? It just doesn't exist. So what Ryan is talking about here is learn from the experiences of all of those different leaders. Learn from the lessons that are contained in all of those leadership books, in leadership courses, etc. But it's meaningless until you turn around and put it into the practice in your specific team and your specific circumstance. And that's the true element of leadership, is to be able to put these things into practice.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a little bit like all these books are a little bit like the Bible or the Quran. They give you parables and stories of the way you should behave, but you have to apply it to your specific instance. Yeah, it's a very good point.
Perfect. All right, so tell us about leadership insurance. You touched on that before. What led you to the term leadership insurance for your programs?
Well, we actually were thinking about it. Christian, when we refounded the company, Christian Earhart came up with this idea because he used to sell insurance for GE way back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And that was, they were still using the Jack Welch way, which was the bottom 10% were cut regardless of their performance. And he said that motivated you, but he said it wasn't. Well, what I found was you didn't have great teams. Sometimes a great team would break apart because of the way that worked. But what he learned, and why we stuck with insurance, is that he said, as I was selling this, and we were talking about how do we build good leaders, we're creating this insurance policy that helps you learn more about yourself, learn about your place in the team, communicate your skill sets effectively, who you are and what you're doing and how you're going to offer the team benefit, then have the mental resilience to stick to those things and try not to make mistakes or overextend yourself. And when you put all those together, you end up with accountability that is measurable. And the abstract concepts are then, because you have consistent terminology of using Myers-Briggs for terms, consistent terminology from communication skills that we talk about and we teach in terms of like supporting statements and I messages and things along those lines. And the same with mental resilience, goal setting, those kinds of tools that help you stay focused, envisioning your target and your goal. All those are the metrics. Is somebody using supporting statements effectively? If they aren't, well, let's talk to them about what they need and help coach them up. That gives us that metric. So everybody has the same thing. And when our clients start doing that and measuring their team along those metrics, there's a consistency that means that everybody can, for a short term, jump in and do another person's job because they know they've translated enough between each other to be able to jump in. Now, for long term, that person probably not be a great fit, but that's not what we want. We just need people to be able to keep the ball moving if somebody's struggling for some reason.
What you're talking about there is, I think, really important is team resilience. And this is where I get concerned sometimes about the word resilience, because at an individual level, it could drive people to be stoic and not stick up their hand and ask for help when they need it. But when you have a resilient team, it's able to flex and mold. And if someone is having a particularly bad run, whether it be with their workload or something in the work environment, or whether it's in their personal life, a resilient team is able to cope with that very well. I think that's what you're talking about there. Very interesting.
Yep. And how do you build that is it doesn't just happen accidentally. It has to be planned and thought out. And you would see, if you look behind any good leader, you will see that they've done some version of what I just outlined.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I think that leads us back now to MBTI. I want to test that a little bit. We've brought it up a few times during the interview, and I've been reading some things that you've posted on LinkedIn with quite positive things to say about profiling, but also with some words of caution. So share with the audience how a leader can use something, whether it's Myers-Briggs or any other profiling tool. How can leaders use profiling tools in a positive way? And what are the things to look out for?
Yeah, good. The first thing I'll say is, the Myers-Briggs is a tool I use the most, but that's just mostly because most of my clients know it, and it's one of the most well-known around the world. Any of the tools are out there can function for this, and some are actually better than the Myers-Briggs, to be honest. But what I'm after, again, remember, I started with self-awareness. We want common terminology. So if most people know the Myers-Briggs and they're comfortable with it, well, let's stick with it. And that's why I usually end up using that. So it's a fascinating tool because its purpose is basically self-awareness, and that's where both my word of caution and my encouragement of using Myers-Briggs come together here. It's great for self-awareness, and that's it. So don't use it for other things. It doesn't work for hiring or firing somebody. It doesn't work for all kinds of those other tools that we want to try to make it into. It doesn't coach you can't get INTJ and ENTJ and expect that they're going to make a great leadership team. You have to evaluate that person's skills, interests, and abilities before you figure those things out. But it is a great common term. And what I think is great is extroversion versus introversion. Introverts are some of the best team members you can ever have, but only if you use them wisely. If you don't ask them questions and you don't give them time to think and consider what's going on, you're not going to create a good, well-functioning team. And that's where the Myers-Briggs is valuable. Same thing for a thinking person versus a feeling person. I've found over my years of experience with Myers-Briggs that's where a lot of conflict arises. Everybody does both of these skills. In Myers-Briggs, we do all of that. At some point, you're extroverted in your world. At some point, you're introverted. Same thing with thinking and feeling. At some point, you think logically about everything and analyze everything. And at another point, you're emotional and you feel things and you worry about your family and the needs of your community. So the trick is most people who are thinking individuals, they think first and then they go to emotions, and feeling people feel first and then move to their logic. So what happens there? And the emotional person is feeling like the thinking person isn't listening to them, and eventually gets frustrated and upset and yells. And at that point, the thinking person is now emotional and yelling back. so so you have to be very careful. Knowing where people are means you can adjust your behavior to make sure that you're heard. That's how you put the Myers-Briggs together with communication skills and mental resilience and tie them all into a usable tool. That's what I was referring to when I talked about my client earlier, who wanted to do Myers-Briggs. And I said, that's great, but you're just paying me money and I'll take it. But are you sure you don't want to do something with it? You want to apply the tools. And Myers-Briggs is a great tool to apply in terms of self-awareness and understanding and building a good team. Because if you have people with all the same letters on the Myers-Briggs, you'll have a great team that cooperates well, but they might miss something really important. They might miss important details. They might miss important structure, any of that kind of stuff. And that's where we use the Myers-Briggs, but any of these tools that are self-awareness based in terms of personality are great for this kind of purpose.
Outstanding, Ryan. I love everything you're saying there. So lessons to take away from that. If you're going to do any of these profiling techniques, you do it for a purpose in mind, for a reason why you're doing it, and that you're going to do something with the results. And I do like this emphasis on self-awareness. I'll take it to another level. It's also team awareness of each other. So
yes.
getting to know each other, getting to know each other's preferences so that you can either as the leader or even the team dynamics amongst themselves, just understand each other.
Yes.
Whether and on every one of the scales, E versus I, S versus N, all of those, just understanding where someone is at can really help you to communicate with them, engage with them, and going forward. So, yeah, wonderful reflection there, Ryan. I really appreciate that. So that draws us towards a close. I've got a few questions for you. I've got two questions that I ask all of our guests, but I've been experimenting a little bit recently with adding a few. So let's go with a few additional ones, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
The first one, do you have a favorite leadership book?
Oh, well, I pulled some down from my bookshelf, and so I'm looking at them over here. I have, I think my favorite one right now. What we talked about earlier, how times change. If you asked me 5 years ago, my favorite book, it'd be something different. But I think right now my favorite one is this one called Meltdown, and it's by Chris Clearfield and Andres Tilcik. It's the subtitle is Why Our Systems Fail and What We Can Do About It. What I love about the book is that they're talking about the world we live in today. We have made a world of systems, and very complicated systems that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of moving parts, human and otherwise. And what that book is talking about is that we have to take our leadership to another level. We used to be able to manage an entire company just with one person running it, and we used to think that was enough. Think about the company from the 1950s. Most of the time, it was one white man running it, and he was one moving all the pieces around. Today, that's just not possible. A system like a hospital system or a school system, there's so many moving parts and so many expectations, especially in terms of service. One person just can't do it, and if something breaks, then the whole system melts. And that's what this book was actually referring to: is the TMI disaster in Pennsylvania in 1979, when the nuclear power plant all melted down. And they still to this day don't know what actually caused that the valve that stuck open to stay open. And that's an example of the complexity. We built a nuclear reactor that was so complicated that we actually can't always understand everything that's happening and how it operates. So for me, that's probably my favorite book at the moment, because it highlights the problem we have as leaders. We need to train leaders who are better prepared to handle the complexity of systems like this. And that means that they're going to be teaching their team how to do their jobs really well, and share the load across the board. Because if one individual fails, it's quite probable that somebody dies. And that's not what we want. We want people to be successful and happy and nobody to die if we can avoid it until it's their time.
Yeah, very good. What about a favorite leadership quote?
Oh, favorite leadership quote. I want to say my own, teach to lead together.
You can do that? Happy with that? All right. And what about an inspirational leader? Do you have a preferred inspirational leader from either your personal past or it could be from the world?
You heard me mention Franklin Roosevelt. He's one of those, but I prefer a personal leader, and that's Ron. Ron Pearson was. He's somebody that I to this day I wish I could be like and be more like. He understood what I would call radical acceptance. That the world is what it is. So it's something he always taught. He always. In fact, I have on my wall over there a picture of him and one of his quotes, which was "Every day is as it should be." And he used to say, "Every day is as it should be" for a couple of reasons. He said, "Look, we know that science is pretty clear that if you have an intention and put your mind to it and envision it, most likely you can get it to happen, whatever it is you want to get. So if you focus your energy on something that you want, and you have tried to operate it effectively, and it's a positive thing, then you're likely going to get it. And every day, every struggle you have, anything that goes wrong in the course of that day, I mentioned to you how my day this morning was kind of frustrating, but that's part of the path, because every day you're learning something that helps you get to where you want to be. So long as you focus on the positives and the things that are helping you, every day is as it should be.
Very good. Okay, next one. What's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I'll tell you what, I wish I knew how frustrating the world can be. Sometimes it seems like, nobody ever wants to invest in you or believe in you or work with you. And that can be pretty depressing. It feels like, the world's against us, regardless of where you live or how successful you might be. And especially right now, don't get me started about COVID-19 or global politics, because, oh my word, it's frustrating, right? So at 20, when I was a young, white, middle-class, idealistic college kid, I was eager. I thought, I'm going to change the world. We're going to make it happen. It also happened to be in the late 1990s when the United States was at the peak of its post-global or post-Cold War power. So in our minds, as arrogant Americans, we thought, we're going to graduate and hammer all the world's problems away with our amazing skills. So, however, what I've learned as I've gotten more wise, I've learned is that one person alone really can't make that type of global change happen. And that really honestly burst my balloon in my late 20s and early 30s. I was really kind of depressed about the world and myself in a lot of ways. But the good news is I've learned now that changing the world can actually be done, but it has to be done with a team. And you must do it with others. It might seem odd to maybe know that in my 20s that I wish I had known that I wasn't good enough to change the world on my own. But the best part about making change together, what it really is that it brings out the best in you and the people you're doing it with. So you can actually make that change happen and make it even better. But what I'm finding is that I'm actually a little even more idealistic now than I was in my youth, because I'm realizing I can do this with a group of people. I wish I had known that then. I really do. I wish I had known that would help me get to my career success faster. I wish my college faculty had taught me some of the skills of team building and leadership before they made me a subject matter expert. Because I know all kinds of good stuff. But how do I apply it? That's actually one of the reasons why I went back to teach. And Mick, I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons I love people like you, because you and your team are helping make that change a reality with the Leadership Project. So if more of us team up together, my frustration will not be someone else's in the future.
We can do so much more together. And I'm going to borrow an African proverb to bring that together. And that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Okay. And finally, Ryan, if people are interested to know more about you, more about EII, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, you can always go to our website, educateinnovateinspire.com. That's the easiest way to reach us. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, under Brian Sanders, as well as my company, EII Consulting. Facebook as well, but although that's less of a platform for communicating. But any way you want to get a hold of us, absolutely give us a ring.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you today, Ryan. A really interesting conversation, as I knew it would be. When we had a chat yesterday, I knew this was going to be a very interesting conversation. Thank you for allowing us to kind of navigate around and cover a lot of different topics. Been an absolute pleasure, and we wish you the best of luck as you continue to forge forward, helping us change the world one team at a time.
Right. Thank you, Mick. And thanks for having me on, and hope that we helped your listeners a little bit.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. I am your host, Mick Spears. Sound design and editing by Faris Sadek. Social media by Gerald Calabo. And special thanks to our operations manager, Say Spears. We appreciate you and we appreciate your time today. You can catch the video podcast and our series of shorter videos by subscribing to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at our Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you another great interview next week as we learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.